Justice delayed is justice denied. Today I'm going to talk to you about Abrego Garcia. Essentially, what we're going to go into is the government's evidence of his MS-13 links. We're going to go into the fact of other allegations made against him, whether or not wearing Chicago Bulls gear makes you a gang member, and then go into the hot-blooded issue of the due process, as well as recommendations for the government in the future. So when it came to, number one, the evidence of MS-13 links, he acknowledged that he illegally entered the United States in 2012 when he was 16 years old. In March 2019, he was detained along with 3 other people in Hyattsville, Maryland, which is where he had been living at the time, in the parking lot of a Home Depot. They were accused, the men he was with, I believe there were 3 or 4 others, were accused of loitering, and they identified Abrego Garcia and 2 other men as MS-13 based on observations. These observations were a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie with rolls of money covering the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth of the money, of the presidents of the different denominations that they had on the hoodie. The claim was that this was indicative of Hispanic gang culture. Wow, if that's not profiling. And also that wearing Chicago Bulls gear had long been known to replace the horns that had been used by MS-13. And then also it represented a member that was in good standing with MS-13. Stephen Dudley, who is a journalist and an author who spent many years studying MS-13, says that the Chicago Bulls logo with the horns became a stand-in for MS-13 devil horn symbol. But the issue is with the apparel. Chicago Bulls are a very popular basketball team franchise. And so a lot of people are wearing Chicago Bulls gear. So that apparel is not exclusive to the gang. Simply wearing it does not make someone a gang member. Also, you need more than that, than saying somebody's wearing a certain item. That's definitely profiling to the highest. Also, things need to be corroborated. I mean, is there criminal history there? Is there testimony? Is there evidence? I mean, you can't just put someone in jail and accuse them of being a gang member because they're wearing Chicago Bulls gear. Also, officers also claim that a proven reliable source, and I don't know that that person has been identified. Also, sometimes, I mean, I'm not saying that all cops are bad because that's not the case. But sometimes things are, as a criminal defense attorney, I've seen this, things are alleged that cannot necessarily be proven. So, that there was a reputable claim that said that proven reliable source that he was an active gang member of MS-13 Western Clique, and he was within the rank of Chiqueo. Well, Garcia's attorneys counter that with the fact that Western Clique is based out of New York, when Abrego Garcia actually lived in Maryland, had never lived in any other state but Maryland while he was in the U.S. He had never lived in New York. Also, he's never been convicted of any criminal offense, either in the United States or in El Salvador. And there's been no indication that he was convicted of being involved in a gang. So in October of 2019, the judge found, based on confidential information, that there was sufficient evidence to support Garcia's gang membership, which was then upheld by another judge. Again, there's not a lot of information about this. This resulted in him being refused bail and held to custody. He then applied for asylum to prevent his deportation to El Salvador. He wasn't given asylum. Asylum would have came with a path to citizenship. Instead, he was given what was called a withholding of removal order. It's different from asylum. And so this would prevent the U.S. government from sending him back to El Salvador, because apparently Abrego Garcia had indicated that his family had a business and that they were targeted by Barrio 13, I believe it is, another rival gang of the MS-13, due to their family business, probably wanting some kickbacks from that. Due to, before his entry in that, he had a well-founded fear of persecution by the Barrio 18, I said Barrio 13, Barrio 18 individuals, which is the main rival of MS-13, who had threatened him and his family due to their family business. And since 2019, when he was released with a protective order, he had had yearly check-ins with immigration officials and attended them without fail or incident. Dudley, who is the journalist and researcher on MS-13, said that Garcia had lived in the U.S. for 14 years. He has 3 kids, and he works in construction. So Dudley also clarifies and disputes what the officers say, that Chicao is not a rank, but instead used to refer to recruits who are yet to be initiated. There's also been allegations by the White House who alleges that the tattoos on Garcia's hands of a marijuana leaf, a smiley face, a cross, and a skull are gang symbols. Again, those are pretty fairly common things for people who get tattoos. I mean, skulls, cross, smiley face, marijuana leaf. The Trump administration also previously released a photo that had been digitally enhanced with an M, an S, a 1, and a 3. In an attempt to explain the tattoos, experts cast doubt on this claim. Also, his wife at one point had filed a protective order against him, alleging that he had physically attacked her on multiple occasions. They ended up working it out. They're still married. They have their children. She said he was a loving father and partner and denied that he had MS-13 gang affiliations. On October 15th, again, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for the Trump administration, alleged that she accused him of human trafficking. And she appeared to be referencing this article from an old conservative website, the Tennessee Star, who claimed that he was detained by a Tennessee Highway Patrol officer under suspected human trafficking in December 2022. The report states that he was stopped for speeding and not staying in his lane. No criminal case was filed. Also, he worked in construction, and so he had like several people in his car. According to his wife, it wasn't uncommon for him to actually transport people between construction sites, especially people who may not have been, citizens at the time. So they couldn't have gotten their license. So is wearing Chicago Bulls gear indicative of gang activity? It's not reliable. It's overly broad and inaccurate. There's a lack of specificity. It's a generic logo. Anyone can get it. A risk of profiling, which is not offering due process again. Focus on superficial appearances. Now, going into the due process violation, he actually held in March 2025 the prior court order which prevented him from being deported to El Salvador due to a credible threat. So when that court order was ignored, that is a violation of his due process rights because that is a right that he had. The Trump administration indicates that it was administrative error. Findings indicate a potential violation of this pre-existing order and possible denial of fundamental due process rights, which are rights that can't be taken away from us. For example, the right to raise your children, things like that. Also, he lost the ability to fair process in light of his protected status. The right to access legal avenues, because by being in El Salvador, he has attorneys from the United States. According to the Trump administration, they can't just get him back. They have no control over that. Actually, that is another falsehood, given the fact that essentially El Salvador is acting as our agent to be able to house these people in El Salvador. But ultimately, Trump is in charge of what is going on here, whether he wants to admit that or not. Additionally, the thing is, his wife is a U.S. citizen. He married a U.S. citizen. He was seeking refuge from gang violence. He obtained a federal permit allowing him to work in the U.S. He has no criminal record. And so this did not keep him from being in. So the difference is he could have been removed elsewhere. There was just one specific location he couldn't be removed to, and that was El Salvador, given the persecution that he was facing. Again, it's different from asylum because there's no path to citizenship. The U.S. did not appeal the decision, so they kind of slept on their rights. There's a certain time frame for that, and they didn't take advantage of the legal process that they did have. So he was arrested by ICE on March 12, 2025, while driving home with his 5-year-old son in the car. The ICE agents informed him that his protected status had changed. This was a falsehood because it did not change. It had not changed. He possessed a valid work permit and court order protection. He should not have been deported. He was deported on March 15th to El Salvador, imprisoned in the Center for Terrorism Confinement, a maximum prison, or a gulag as a lot of people have called it. It's a maximum security facility, notorious for its harsh conditions and its violence. Trump administration called this an administrative error. This allegation, along with alleging that he's an MS-13 gang member, seems very disingenuous. It seems as a way to make an excuse to downplay the violation of his court order, when that is in fact what has happened. There's a disregard for the judiciary, a disregard for the attorneys, and we've seen that all through. We know President Trump has had many legal struggles, and we know that he has afforded his due process. When he had his criminal trials recently for fraud, did he get due process? Yes, he did. So why doesn't he want to give due process to anyone else? As an attorney, this is absolutely distressing and disgusting that something like this would happen in our country. The Trump, again, we talked about this. Also, deportation, given the legal protection, is a blatant disregard for due process and the authority of the courts. So essentially, the Trump administration is saying, we're not listening to you. Senator Chris Van Hollen suggested the administration was knowingly defying the court orders. And I would agree with that by saying, oh, well, we can't do anything. We're doing everything we can. Garcia's deportation occurred on the same day that Trump invoked the Alien and Enemies Act against the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Agua. Now, Abrego Garcia could not be taken under that. His deportation occurred on the same day, but he was not part of the Venezuelan gang, so that couldn't be taken. It was done under the Immigration and Nationalization Act, as he is an El Salvadoran national and would not qualify for the Aliens and Enemies Act. The broader context suggests that there's an aggressive stance to prioritize deportation over established legal procedures, which are the stare decisis, the legal precedent in the United States and in our Constitution. So it's almost like a lack of disregard for citizens' rights in the Constitution. Even though the government claims he is a gang member, they have not presented the original document that was used to justify him being called a gang member. These were the primary documents used in the 2019 bail hearing to support his gang affiliation and subsequent hearings to prove his gang affiliation. Also, he's been denied due process, and due process in immigration law is in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. It guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And this does not matter if you are a citizen or a non-citizen. Everyone in the United States has this right. The 14th Amendment extends this protection to the states. Due process covers the following things: to ensure fairness and to prevent arbitrary or lack of superficial actions from the court. So you have a right to notice. You need to be informed of the changes and the reason for potential removal. You have a right to a hearing before an impartial judge, providing an opportunity to present your case and to know and present documentation against your own removal. You have the right to confront witnesses, to offer testimony and documentation to prove that they're not being honest or that they're lying or whatever. Government is not always required to present or to provide free legal representation. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, depending on the cases. But you do have the right to have legal counsel at your own expense. You have a right to an appeal in adverse position. So if things are adverse decision. So if something goes against you, you do have the right to appeal to make sure that it is the right decision. In addition, you have what is called substantive due process, which allows the review of initial ruling from arbitrary or unreasonable actions that infringe upon your fundamental rights, even if the procedures followed were formally correct. The most immediate issue is that he had an order that should have protected him and should have been respected, but for whatever reason, it was not. Evidence suggests that Garcia may not have even had a meaningful opportunity to contest his deportation. Reports indicate that there was a swift arrest and a swift deportation. His attorneys also claim that they had a lack of notice or opportunity to intervene on his behalf because he's in El Salvador, they're in Maryland or wherever they are. With the order of withholding removal, the government would have to initiate a process to reopen the case because they didn't appeal the initial case. Then they would have to present new grounds to terminate the protection that he had been granted by the judge, allowing the individual the right to challenge and present their own counter-arguments. So Garcia didn't have any of that. That appears to have been bypassed. His detention outside of U.S. jurisdiction complicates the due process. So he essentially is far away, and his attorneys and other individuals who are trying to get him back are running into obstacles because he's not right where they want him to be or close at hand. It's kind of like he's being hidden from us. It also keeps them from actually being able to present legal remedies on his behalf. Some argue that this is deliberate, keeping him out of reach, out of legal avenues and oversight. And Trump continues to offer resistance in assisting in Garcia's return, despite multiple orders from various levels of the federal judiciary. Also, as a due process concern, Trump argues that it lacks authority. He doesn't lack authority. El Salvador is doing exactly what President Trump wants them to do, but he cannot have them oversee something and then claim that they are in charge and he is not. That is a disingenuous and ridiculous argument, and he knows it, especially with all of his experience with lawsuits and criminal cases. So he argues that he lacks authority because it's a sovereign government, El Salvador is. And he has argued, but there has been an argument that the U.S. government is paying El Salvador to detain individuals like Garcia. Of course they are. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has publicly refused to discuss foreign sovereign government. Secretary of State Rubio publicly refused to discuss foreign matters with judges, indicating potential disregard for their oversight and a potential disregard for established legal framework and due process that it is intended to protect. So again, thumbing their nose at judges and the judiciary. There's a reason why there are 3 branches of government. Lawsuits have been filed in the U.S. District of Maryland that challenge his deportation and his detention. It reached the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals and ultimately the Supreme Court of the United States. Judge Paula Zina's strong ruling ordered Trump administration to take steps to bring Garcia back to the U.S., accused Trump administration of acting in bad faith and disregarding court orders, which he has done. She also considered holding them in contempt of court, but has not done that. She also mentioned that their claim that they are powerless to act is shocking. She confirmed that Garcia's due process rights were violated through his unlawful deportation. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled that his removal to El Salvador was illegal and that the Trump administration was obligated to rectify the situation and towards his return. They also wanted clarification of effectuate return, what that actually meant. It almost seems like they are deferring some to Donald Trump, given the similar political affiliation. Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson criticized the government's actions, that there was no legal basis for the warrantless arrest, removal, or continued detention in El Salvador. Trump administration has tried to claim state secrets, government privilege, in an attempt to avoid disclosing what their plans are. The court has rejected this, emphasizing the government's fundamental responsibility to rectify this admitted error and uphold the due process rights of an individual within their jurisdiction. They're absolutely correct on that. Normal deportation has a process, a notice to appear before an immigration judge. The judge then outlines the reasons for deportation. There is a hearing held where the person that is facing deportation has the ability to offer their legal arguments. And then if it doesn't go their way, they have the right to appeal those. Throughout these legal proceedings, the government has presented several legal arguments. Again, they lack authority. They're not able to do this. So essentially, this is a scenario where the administration admits that it messed up, but it's not willing to do anything. And a lot of people are concerned, how long is Abrego Garcia going to be in this gulag? Ultimately, the U.S. government needs to fully comply with all court orders to make sure that he is given a quick and safe return, especially since it's known that he is facing persecution and potential danger. There needs to be a thorough and independent review that should be conducted about procedures and such that led to the erroneous deportation of Abrego Garcia, and those that were responsible for that should be held accountable. To prevent similar issues, the U.S. government needs to uphold its commitment to due process and the rights of all individuals, whether or not they're immigrants or U.S. citizens. They're even doing it to U.S. citizens and the Constitution. Legislative and policy clarifications may be necessary to ensure that court orders are followed, protecting individuals from deportation, and strictly adhere to the laws that are in the Constitution and the rights of individuals. Consideration should be made to establish some more transparency, independent oversight mechanisms, and accountability in immigration enforcement, and to safeguard the due process rights of individuals within the immigration system, because the immigration system is one that is generally difficult for people who are seeking asylum and other means of citizenship and such. So if you got some value from this video, please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great night. Bye-bye.